Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about anxiety spraying.
This term, okay, so anxiety spraying, I'm pretty sure is not like a real clinical term. My husband and I use it. So if I'm anxious, am I keeping some of it under wraps? Am I regulating? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Or am I making everyone feel it? We call that anxiety spraying in our house. So as terrible as it sounds, my husband and I will say things like, stop spraying on me, which sounds really bad. And I recognize that as I say it. But we talk about being an anxiety sprayer and an anxiety sponge.
Yeah.
Am I soaking it up or am I letting it roll off my back like a duck? Right? So anxiety spraying is I've got high anxiety and I'm letting everyone else feel it with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or externally processing, getting it out. And whether you're doing that effectively or you're just running all over, you're unsettled, you're moving stuff, you're bossing people
doing
around.
Hand stuff.
Yeah.
That's a big one. My tone, if I look like chaos.
I mean, ultimately, this comes down to what we're going to be talking about today is how are you regulating emotions, your own emotions, and how is it showing up in your relationship?
Yep.
And anxiety spraying is a very, very, very common one because anytime anyone experiences stress or we're anxious about it, some people want to get it out, or some people isolate and shut down.
Or at minimum, we don't know how to cope through it. And so it just drips off of us like water.
Yeah.
Right?
And everyone has it. But how you're managing in the relationship, is that effective or helpful? One of the issues that I see come up a lot is there's not much balance. You'll get one partner who's just sprays, and the other one's a sponge. And then there's resentment. And then the one who's a sponge typically will build that resentment, but they won't feel like they have space. So they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And then long term, that partner, they don't feel connected.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because they haven't had the space to be vulnerable. Because there's so much of their space is used on managing the anxiety of the other partner.
Think about this even in terms of anger. Anger works much the same, right? Can I be angry and process it and hold it? Or am I taking it out by yelling, slamming things, throwing things? It's exactly the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I dealing with my own emotions? Am I regulating? Am I trying to work through it in a way that is still conducive and space giving to the other? Or am I making sure everyone knows this is how I feel and not leaving room for anyone else to express themselves?
And it's okay to have anxiety. It's okay to have anger. We just want to be very conscientious of how it shows up in our relationship. And is it allowing our partner or family member or friend to also have space? When there's equal space or balance in space, and I'm not talking about equal every time, it's going to oscillate. Right. Someone's going to be in more stress than the other at some point, or vice versa. And unfortunately, sometimes both are in stress. But you have to be very conscientious of how much space you give. And also how you deal with it is not how the other person's going to deal with it. And a lot of us want to engage in what we call control behaviors. We're so uncomfortable that I need to engage in some behavior to help regulate this. Sometimes they're not healthy, right? Sometimes it's being like very, perfectionistic around the house. And that bleeds over onto the family or the partner or the friend. And so just because that's your way to calm doesn't mean that's the only way that has to go. And if it's always your way, there's another aspect where there's imbalance.
Or anxiety spraying can be if I'm anxious all the time, if I am hyped up and my partner needs my support, do I give them room to also ask for support? Or do I say, not now, I'm anxious. Not now, I'm worked up. If I'm never giving room, that's toxic for a relationship. That cuts my partner out of the equation.
And I think something that I hear that would, I think, draw the picture very well for this is I'm walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And that's for the partner who doesn't have space because they don't know what they're coming into because there's just emotions all the time. And it is responsible for that person to find a way to regulate on their own, whether they have to go to therapy for that or self-help books or finding ways. And maybe you have another outlet or finding another way to process it, to externalize it, whether that's a journal, whether that's another, like a friend, and you don't use the same one every time, but something
to regulate. We are not, as partners, we are not meant to be our partner's therapist all the time. It is healthy to get support from other people besides just our partner. It is healthy to learn how to regulate, to learn how to identify and manage your emotions, even with your spouse. Yes, our spouse is where we're going to fall apart, where I'm going to be my messiest self, where I'm going to process things that I wouldn't process with other people. But is there room for them to also do the same? Or am I taking up so much space that they don't get room?
Is your spray overwhelming that no one else can spray?
When you say it like that, Greg, yay. I even talk to couples about body positioning,
Yeah.
and I have them use their body in the space of how much space do you think you take up? How much space do you think your partner takes up? So I'll have them stand up and am like my arms wide. Am I taking up a ton of room? Or am I kind of crouched in the fetal position and there isn't room for me? That can be a really illuminating experience for couples. So they can see, wow, my partner is really tucked in themselves. They are in the fetal position. There isn't room because I'm over here spreading out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
How do we create room for both of us?
And it's an interesting thing to think about. Like for my wife in particular, I would say that in her role in the family growing up, she didn't have much space. She had 4 siblings. She was the youngest of 4. And she also had,
Wow.
other family members that were more distraught more frequently. So there was no space. She learned that. And then she meets me, who I spray. And
So she is still in her fetal position.
well, I've become conscientious of it and
Yeah.
recognize, and I've, earlier on, I'm like I talk a lot about this stuff, but I don't hear much from you. And she's like, well, there's not space. I'm like, oh, well, what do you need for space? And so we've navigated that earlier on, but that's because, well, I have the benefit of being in this profession and being aware of it. But it's why we're talking about this episode, so other people can recognize it. Of balancing and processing emotions is important. It also looks like a partner coming home and they're super stressed, so they can never get intimate. That's on the partner who's super stressed all the time. You've got to
Or
manage
they can
that.
never help with chores around the house.
Yep.
They can never hear about your stress as their partner. They can never help with the kids. They're really short with the kids. If the kids are crying, nope, stop crying. I've had a hard day.
Mm-hmm.
Some days that's real. That's going to happen. But is it every day? Is it all the time?
Yeah.
That's a sign you are not attuning to emotional reciprocity,
Mm-hmm.
allowing for that to happen for both partners or the whole family.
And it's also on the responsibility of the one who doesn't spray in the relationship, if there's an imbalance, to assert the need for space.
Which can feel really intimidating because if I already don't feel like I have space because my partner shuts me down every time I talk, how do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I say like, no, actually, I need to talk about this. I know you're
Yeah.
anxious. I know you've had a hard day and we need to talk about this.
Another area I see this a lot, or the pattern that I see quite a bit, is the partner who doesn't get much space will often be like, I need space, and walk away. And the partner who's processing, like, they don't ever want to hear me. They don't want to listen. They don't ever have time for me.
Mhm.
And then you break it down and you're like, oh, it's because they've never had time to talk to you about what's going on for them. And they're trying to create space in the best way they know how. And it's overwhelming.
You're pushing them away, which then validates your greatest fear, likely that
Yeah.
no one wants to be around you. But by way of spraying, by way of taking up so much space, you do push people away.
Which then creates other anxiety.
And it just becomes this
Yeah.
cycle, right? Because the more I push, I use hands. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it. But if you're listening, I use hands to explain this to couples. So right hand, left hand paired together, upright. And if I am the pursuer, if I'm the one taking up the space, if I'm the sprayer, I'm going to push back.
Mhm.
My right hand dominates then my left hand. The more I push away, the more my partner's backing up, the further away from me they go.
Mhm.
I have to, if I'm the one who's spraying, taking up space, I have to back up first to create space for my partner to meet me back up at center. It can't be them pushing their way through me first, right? How do we navigate through that? If I don't have the tools to regulate in order to back up, how do I figure that out? Where do I go for support? How do I learn that skill? Maybe I was never given it. But if you continue to push and push and push, you're going to push them right out the door.
And for the person who might have to ask for space because it's continually getting pushed or sprayed, is understanding that it's so natural for the other person to process that way that it's probably not even a second thought. There's not intention. It's not like, I need to take the space. I don't care what my partner has to say. They're so overwhelmed that this is just a natural process that probably happened in the family origin as well, whether observed or they actually got to do that in the family. So some kind of compassion of like, okay, this is what they naturally do. And there needs to be some assertiveness, or, whether you need to go learn how to be assertive or talk through that, that's okay. But find a way to even bring it up of, I would like some time to process my stress. I hear you. I know you're stressed. I'm wondering if we can create space for me. But that's really important because I feel like that's where the awareness typically comes from, is the one who suffers most, because the one who's spraying is like, this is great.
And they feel so distressed that there isn't attunement. Those are two different parts of the brain that don't often communicate at the same time, right? I can't both have attunement and awareness while also living in fight or flight.
Yeah.
Because if I have attunement and awareness, if I'm running from a bear and I'm like, oh, that flower is really pretty, you're going to get eaten. So if I'm constantly running from the bear, I can't also be attuning. I can't also be in that introspective place. So sometimes it does require the partner who's getting shut out to be the assertive one, as you're saying.
And when I work with couples, I also work on intrapersonal. So INTRA personal, so they can better navigate the couple stuff.
That's within, so interpersonal is within self. No,
intra.
is within,
Yeah.
intra is within self, inter is between us.
Yeah. So the intrapersonal within myself.
Yeah.
I also work with them to navigate that so they can manage emotions to come back up because, and it's not, you can also use the relationship and the partner to spray at times. It's, you don't always want to do that. Right? You don't always just want to like diarrhea all your stress all the time. We got to change our language.
Change our metaphors here. It's getting real weird.
But you don't want to just kind of like overwhelm your partner all the time. It's okay to use the relationship. There has to be a good balance of how do I regulate myself versus the thing. And if you're completely dysregulated, and I see this all the time, it goes on the relationship all the time.
That's why we have pursuer distancer dynamics, right? We know that it's inherent in a large portion of relationships where one partner is pursuing, one person is kind of running away.
Yeah. That's the most common dynamic. Absolutely.
Emotional spraying goes with that. I am taking up space. I am not attuning to reciprocity. I am just getting my needs met without really paying attention to what does my partner need.
And I will say us that tend to just vomit all our anxiety don't like being around other people who vomit.
So it sounds like that's for you, Greg. Do you align with this?
Yeah, I said that earlier in my analogy. Like that's where I started out. That's how I process. And I realized like, oh my God, like this isn't healthy. But I didn't know that in my adolescence or even early adulthood or anything like that. So I've learned that over time and grateful now because my wife, we can be more conscientious of it. But I would say that I think on an unconscious level, we can't be around other people who are just ultimately like stressed because one, it takes up our time. And it we're already stressed enough, so it just adds to the bucket, the emotional contagion piece of it. Which
is fascinating that you're a therapist, by the way.
Yeah.
That usually you're the one that takes up room, but your very job is to create room.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, you've had to learn that skill, and that I learned a lot about myself through that process. And I see that a lot with couples. That's when everyone says birds of a feather flock together kind of thing. I see a lot of balance, and that balance is important. When you get two very anxious people together, it gets very chaotic and very heightened in conflict. And you get two people who are distancers,
it just died. The relationship doesn't exist.
So it's important to have that balance, but be conscientious of what that looks like, especially if you know what your role is. Like if you're a distancer, make sure that you're coming to and turning toward. Get out of your comfort zone, just like the person who needs to express all the stress of, I need to back up a little bit.
And is there ebb and flow? Like, as I reflect, my husband and I have been together for 18 years. As I reflect, there have been periods where I'm the sprayer and he's just like, whoa, like he backs up, right? But then there are periods in which he is, or even dynamics, traveling. He gets really anxious while traveling. Sorry, Chris. And so like, I know that. I'm going to contain that space for him.
Yeah.
I get anxious prepping for travel. He gets anxious at the airport. So while prepping, he's just kind of go with the flowing. At the airport, I'm just going with the flow, right? That's a reciprocity and dynamic. It's okay. There are times when he's going to take up more room. There are times when I am. The concern is when it's a constant state. If there is never a shift in dynamics, that's the problem.
And I like you put the dynamics because you see it show up differently in relationships. And I think a very basic example is one partner procrastinates and the other needs a plan.
Oh gosh, even that word is like, ugh.
And you got to think about those are different anxiety levels.
Yes.
Right. So for a procrastinator, the anxiety level doesn't get high enough until towards the end to actually take action.
Makes me want to cringe. That's my husband.
And they typically function better at that time.
They do. And it really pisses me off.
And then you have those who their anxiety is so much in the forefront that they don't want that hanging over their head. So I need to prepare now.
I feel so seen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Neither is right or wrong, but there's differences, and they both show up in the household. Like for example, we need to get these dishes done. I want to think about them. Procrastinator's like, we'll get to them. I'm not anxious about it. Or when you get laundry. And the unfortunate piece is the one where the anxiety is more upfront. They tend to take on a lot more if they aren't cautious about that.
I feel so seen. Thank you, Greg. That's me.
You're welcome.
And my marriage. Yeah.
You can pay me later.
And it's so true,
Yeah.
right? But we see the shifts in dynamics, whether it is household stuff, procrastinating, crises. How do each of you do in a crisis? Financial crisis, health crisis, child crisis. How do you do in terms of travel, unexpected things, family dynamics? Some people can be cool as a cucumber, not need much space. Their parents come around and they go to shit, right? Now all of a sudden they're very anxious. They need a lot of space. Can you let that reverse? Can I now be the supportive partner?
Yeah.
It is really interesting to watch which dynamics pull at us differently, pull at who's the sprayer differently. And to one of your points earlier, what if we both are wanting to take up space? What if we're both super freaking anxious? Then what?
So that's where I love Gottman's 30-minute stress reduction conversation. Each gets 15 minutes. The person who's listening can't solve, fix, or anything unless a partner asks. And you listen and you use reflective listening. You're just not, and that's it. And they get to that space. You can change the time on it if you want. But I like the structure around it because then that boundary is like, hey, you got 15 minutes. And I know you want to go more, but shut up. My turn.
Yep. And having tools. If you know you're about to go into an anxious situation, have your tools ready. Have that friend on speed dial. Get your baths every day. Go for a run every day. Whatever it is for you, build in those other tools because, again, your partner can't be your everything. And there are times when we're both going to be anxious. How do we navigate that? Afterwards, maybe we need to apologize. Maybe we step on each other's toes in that.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Right?
And I love this conversation because awareness about how we manage anxiety, how to give space, how does it show up in our relationship in terms of household chores, this can help the quality of the relationship drastically.
Oh, yeah.
Because both needs are getting met if you can accommodate each other's needs. But when only one person's anxiety and stress is ruling it all, that typically doesn't end well or go well. It may never end, but it doesn't go well. Kind of like those couples. We've been together 50 years. It's like, that's quantity. How's the quality?
Amen. That is so important.
Yeah.
Right? And when we enter kids into the dynamic, that shakes it up even more.
Yeah.
Because kids, I know this might be shocking, take up a lot of emotional space. So how do I, if I'm used to having all the space I want in the world, now I've got this kiddo who's crying all the time. How do I balance that?
Yeah.
How do I not forget that my partner also is still included? Right? They don't replace my partner. But now we've got to manage 3 people, 4 people, 5 people's dynamics.
Yeah. You're the more stressed parent, so the other one has to take care of the kid more. Not cool.
Yeah.
There has to be balance. You've got to figure out yourself. And if you're the anxious partner, go get help, go get skills. You're doing yourself a favor. You're doing your relationship a favor. It's really, really important. And pay attention to the nuances. If you really try to practice these things and try to understand how is my partner anxious, or if you're the one who typically is expressing the emotions in the relationship more, give that partner space. But you might notice some hesitancy. You might notice that they're hesitant, and that's because they're not used to it. And they're like, hold on, are they going to talk? Are they going to talk? And this is going on in their head. And then you're like, I want to hear from you. And then they kind of need to get the lay of the land and make sure it's safe first.
Feel it out.
They typically probably have never had that safety to do so. So be patient with it. Be okay with your own silence.
It's going to take a minute for them to fill that proverbial gap I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Because it's got to feel safe. Just because you said you're cool with me sharing my emotions doesn't mean you're actually cool with it. I got to test it out. I got to put my toe in the water and see if it's warm. I got to feel it all before I actually go.
And it's not a bad thing, right? Because depending on what you want to process, it might trigger your partner, and you got to see if they're in a good state. And being aware of that. Like my wife, for example, there is a lag time, and I can tell, like, I want to hear from you. I'll sit there, and then I'll sit there, and then she knows, and I can see her light up, and then she talks, and it's kind of like how I would talk. She's very vocal. I'm like, sweet, but there's a lag time, and you just tune into your partner. It's really important to tune in those moments.
This is something that emotional reciprocity, we cannot state enough, is so important in relationships. It communicates valuing your partner. It communicates that I am a safe place for you. It communicates trust. It communicates some of these deep core values of a relationship. So if reciprocity isn't there and it's chronically not there, it's time to check what
Mhm.
we can do to fix that. It is not healthy.
Yeah. Essentially, the world does not revolve around you.
Oh,
And
shit.
just because you have anxiety and
Mhm.
manage it a certain way does not mean that that has to happen all the time, especially if it shuts your partner out.
Mhm.
You need to work on your own anxiety and your need for control
Mhm.
because it will create imbalance and does not bode well and for intimacy
Mhm.
or
And your
long-term
anxiety, your
success.
anger, we know is contagious. Look at kids. When we talk to parents, if you're anxious, your baby's anxious. They read off of you.
Look at your animals. They do.
Yes. Your partner is the same way. If I'm anxious, super heightened all the time, my partner's going to feel that. So not only are they going to shut down, but they're also going to start to get more anxious. It breeds this really potentially toxic cycle within the
Mhm.
relationship or family.
And going back to what I said earlier, I want to emphasize this. Find other outlets.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because when you feel like you've talked it out with somebody else, maybe you can come back to your relationship, which is more of a priority, and be present.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need to get it out of you.
Mhm. And do the things like baths, walks, eating well, the things that you know are going to help your nervous system soothe, because at the core, that's what that is. Your nervous system is reacting and responding. If you don't know what those things are, by the way, to calm a nervous system, look it up. There are
Mhm.
lots of tools to help us downregulate our nervous system. You are responsible for that, not your partner.
Mhm.
Partner is not responsible for your anxiety.
And listen to music. Just make sure it's not music that triggers you more. When you're angry, listen to rage music. I mean,
Be
um,
mindful of it.
yeah.
Be mindful of what you choose. Be mindful of how you are spraying. I can't even say it without laughing now. How you are spraying your emotions and anxiety on your
Yeah.
children, on your partner, on your family, your coworkers. Try to be mindful. Be aware of how your emotional state is impacting other people, and do
Mhm.
the things you need to get support.
And a very simple one you can even try just after listening to this, if you don't know it already, is breathing. Breathing is one of the most effective ways to slow down your stress response system. And you can do a simple breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. And when you breathe in, push out your belly so you know you're breathing through the
360.
diaphragm.
You want that whole lower rib cage to really stretch.
Yep. So breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds while expanding your rib cage and your belly. Hold it for 4 seconds. And then you're going to breathe out like you're breathing through a straw for 8 seconds.
Mhm.
And it may not just be once. Sometimes I have to do that 20 times, but you will notice yourself kind of melt back into yourself. Very simple. You can even do it while you're driving, at work, doesn't
Oh,
matter.
yeah.
But that's what you have control over, and that's your responsibility, not to continually spray emotions all over your partner.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where today we've talked about emotional spraying and reciprocity and really being aware of creating emotional space for other people. As always, if you have any questions or topic suggestions, please feel free. Greg, you're killing me. Please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks.